It's natural to get a little obsessed with someone when you meet them, when you fall for them, but if that obsession is taking over your life and that person is emotionally unavailable, they've pulled away, they're hot, cold, or they're just uncertain about you, it may be a sign you have love addiction or limerence. This is where you play the romantic slot machine game, waiting for the next hit of dopamine or breadcrumb they drop to keep you hooked. But you will actually spend most of your time gambling your life away when you try to have a relationship with someone because they are not relationship material. I'm going to unpack love addiction and whether this might be you today. And make sure you stick around to the end because I'm going to give you a great tool to check in your body to see if it's love addiction. And if you're new here, welcome. My name is Amy and I help women who've left a toxic relationship and are sick of falling for emotionally unavailable men to stop self-abandoning by healing the core wounds at the level of the body so they can be happy on their own and their true authentic self in love. And if this sounds like you, please consider subscribing to my channel and click the bell button so you get notified when I post a new lesson, which is every week. Now, before I get started with today's lesson, Heal Your Heart School is open for enrollment. So if you're interested in working with me, make sure you stick around to the end and I'll show you how to apply. This video is personal for me because I was stuck in love addiction or limerence for years and I had absolutely no idea. But for me, love was always extremely painful. I was always chasing a person, right? I was always hyper focused and hyper fixated on someone. They were always someone that couldn't commit or emotionally unavailable in some way. And I was trying to fix their problems. Like I was trying to be the caretaker, I was trying to be the rescuer, and I was really blinded by the connection that I had with my limerent object or that person. And I remember being so frustrated one day. I was just on Google trying to figure out what was wrong with me, and I stumbled across the manifesto and the documents for SLAA, which is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. Now, I don't have a sex addiction, but the love addiction side of it, it made complete sense. I was acting like an addict and everything in that document just kind of hit little light bulbs for me. So these are the signs that you might have love addiction. You're always in relationship. You're often leapfrogging from one relationship to another. You tend to attract emotionally unavailable or toxic partners. Like that is the kind of person you're always trying to have a relationship with. And you always fall in love quickly with them, right? You're never dating. There's never that kind of discernment. Should I go into a relationship with them or not? You just fall straight in. It's a whirlwind. It's a huge, big romance. And it often ends in flames. And you never feel yourself in relationship. You're always like people pleasing or you're avoiding conflict and you never really feel like you can actually open up and be yourself. And there is always an obstacle to you being together with that person. I'll explain in a minute why that's a part of the love addiction process. But you think about them and their potential more, that's more exciting for you than actually being with them and the reality with them. So you're kind of like hooked on the mental process of thinking about them. So there's a lot of fantasy thinking. I was doing that as a self-soothing mechanism. And deep down, I had an intense fear of abandonment. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, I've got you. I'm going to explain it in a minute. So this is obsession, this obsessive behavior of addiction is a deeper sign of unease or a wound that you are running from, right? It's actually a form of a coping mechanism, a way to kind of ignore what's actually going on. In my case, I was running from the truth. This person I was trying to, get into a relationship with and I was kind of addicted to was just not available to commit to me. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were actually being pretty honest about it, but I was just in this limerent state where I couldn't fully hear what was being said to me. And I was ignoring the red flags of the dynamic of what was actually going on, that they wanted something different than what I did. And I wasn't asking the honest questions. I wasn't being honest with myself. And I was in this kind of self-deluded state that resulted in me clinging more and chasing more. Now, I want you to realize that this is actually a fight response. This is a trauma response of chasing. This is an aspect of love addiction. So let's unpack what love addiction is. It's also known as limerence. They're both exactly the same thing, despite what other people might say. This is a psychological state of infatuation with what's called a limerent object, or an object which is a person or a projection of a person that you think you have. And your connection to that person and the absence of that person, and this connection to and absence from your limerent object or person, produces a heightened response response in your brain. More heightened than when a secure person that's not in an addictive state would feel, right? It is already quite an exciting time, but a love addicted person in limerence is going to feel a much more intense sense of dopamine when they do get that connection, and when there's that starvation, when that person pulls away, there is an even more deeper depth of despair that they're not connected to you. And this is exactly just like an alcoholic has a heightened response to drinking alcohol. Someone that isn't an alcoholic, when they drink, they have a different response in their body than when an alcoholic does. It's the same with love addiction. The neurochemistry in the brain of someone in limerence as opposed to someone who's secure is the difference between a roller coaster ride and a relatively smooth, maybe a little bit of a bumpy car ride that a regular person going into a relationship has. Now, it's important to understand that the absence or unavailability of that person is what fuels the addiction. Like a slot machine, the absence of wins every time you pull that lever, or the absence of them in your life, is what actually feeds the addiction. We need to chase more, we need to try and get more. If that person was completely emotionally available, healthy, showing up and being ready to go into a healthy relationship with them, you could not form a limerent connection with them. It just doesn't work at all, because when you're seeing them all the time, when you're actually seeing them for who they are, and your reality of that person is your main experience of them, there's no opportunity for you to get into limerence or love addiction, which is a fantasy state of the mind. Love addiction needs absence to form, because the connection you have with the person, with the limerent object, is not actually with them, it's with your fantasy of them or your projection of that person, okay? Let me say that again. The person that you're in relationship, in love addiction to, is not the actual person, it's your own made up version of that person in your head that you're connected to. So this is why they're called a limerent object. It's not the person, it's the object that you're attached to. You're objectifying them and projecting onto them often all of your unmet needs from childhood, and creating this fantasy version based on tiny little snippets of reality you've got from them that have kind of caused this mechanism to start. You imagine that they can meet all of your needs, whether they actually can in reality or not. And let's face it, like, no one can ever meet all of your needs in reality. That is just not actually possible. And you put them on a pedestal, right? You build up this idea of them based on your own projection, based on your own things that you've made up in your mind. So reality actually has very little to do with it, but reality can trigger it, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But when you actually do spend time in person with someone that is your limerent object, often the reality of that person grates on you, right? Like their quirks, their habits, their just general themness doesn't match the fantasy you have in your head. So like when I was in limerence, like I'd kind of get angry with them and ask them why they were doing that, because it didn't match my idea of them in their head. And I just preferred to be, in my head and thinking about them. And I love Heidi Priebe, she calls it, I think it's mental masturbation or emotional masturbation. It's so true. You're kind of using the pathways of your fantasy imagination to feed yourself these chemicals. And this is kind of where the addiction is. And it puts the phrase dream partner in a completely new light, right? So let's talk about what triggers love addiction, because it is actually the reality of the person, some things that you see in them, and you don't ever have to have met someone in person to actually get love addicted to them. This might be a person that you just talk to online. You get triggered initially through some kind of significant initial connection where you feel this amazing connection, a familiar feeling. They feel like home, they feel safe. You might think they're your soulmate or your twin flame. There are all these kinds of words and concepts out there to describe this limerent state. But this is actually the primitive part of your brain that you have absolutely no control over, that is primed to choose a person who seems familiar to you. This is called transference, where you then repeat old feelings, desires, and dreams onto a present person based on some kind of familiarity between the two. This is not much deeper than neurochemistry, honestly, and it only takes a few cues to actually trigger this happening. Now, familiarity is obviously not always a good thing. So if you grew up as a child, you had an emotionally unavailable father, for instance, perhaps they were absent as well, and when you think of love and loving your father, it's mixed in with these feelings of longing and abandonment, deep despair, and deep, deep, deep love, right? That new guy comes in and makes you feel the same way. You think you're in love, but that new guy is also going to be emotionally unavailable. He's going to be all of those same things, right? You've transferred the longing and love from emotionally unavailable father to the emotionally unavailable guy. Now, why do we fantasy bond? Like, what's the fantasy aspect here? I've talked about how this is actually a part of the addiction process, but the reason why we fantasy bond starts with the initial kind of experiences of relationships when we were really young. So let's take that example of you having an emotionally unavailable father. In order to cope with their unavailability and this feeling of unrequited love and feeling abandoned, like these are all really big feelings that a young child cannot process. We have this amazing mechanism where we will create our own version of the bond and who they are that we then bond and connect to. And that allows us to feel connected, to feel safe, which is a primal survival need. And it comes from the primitive part of our brain. So this is subconscious. We wouldn't be aware of it happening. So it's protecting this deep core wound we have. I call this an abandonment wound. And if you've not heard of an abandonment wound before, I want you to watch this video next. I go into a lot of detail there, but this is a coping mechanism to deal with these deep feelings of abandonment. It's a very clever, very intelligent way to protect us from not being able to handle those feelings. But if you never heal or if you never mature out of that habit, that fantasy habit will grow. That's what happened with me. And it is something that can be so destructive to your life, to your internal life, to your love life. And with regards to me, you know, I never matured out of that habit of a fantasy projection. And, you know, I had a lot of fantasy stories and imaginations and things going on in my head when I was a child, as well as the ones to do with my, you know, romantic partners. And then as an adult, I just kept on attracting increasingly more unavailable men, because I didn't realize that every time I would, you know, go into a relationship with someone who was even more unavailable, who's even more like, you know, impossible to have a relationship with, like I could list off all the things, it actually made my fantasy experience of the relationship more and more rich. And this was actually, I didn't realize, a positive thing for me. I actually thought the connection was even better than this past person I'd been with, right? But I didn't realize it was actually my experience of limerence was getting stronger and stronger. And of course, I wasn't actually having a relationship with them, right? The last person I was limerent with lived across the other side of the Pacific Ocean. The relationship we had didn't really exist, but in my mind, it was so rich and so strong. So you're not in relationship with an actual person. You're in relationship with your version of them, and the actual person is someone else entirely. So like I said, spending time with that person will often cause a lot of issues for you in your limerent state. And, you know, being limerent, being in love addiction with someone means that you just cannot have any healthy intimacy, right? Like you're not actually seeing a person for who they are and really allowing them to feel seen, heard, known, and understood. And just as equally, you are not letting yourself be seen, heard, known, and understood. Like you don't have those skills. You don't know how to do that. And this is a protective mechanism, right? This is actually stopping you from feeling any further abandonment. Like as long as you don't get to know the real me, you won't really hurt me. So this is a way to keep a nice safe buffer between you and that person. It works in that way as well. But it is an incredibly lonely, sad place. I have been there, and it is just the highs of the limerent state are kind of worth it, worth the payoff when you're in it. But when you experience it bottoming out, it's terrifying. I can still viscerally feel in my body the edges of the terror I would feel when I was a love addict, when I was in that state of limerent. If I wake up early in the morning and I haven't quite got my functions together, I can still feel the bodily effects of just complete self-abandonment and complete disconnection from my internal state. This is a extremely destructive behavior and pattern to be in. So it's incredibly imperative that you learn how to heal this. I'm going to go through how I did this and give you a tool. So the first thing that I did, the first thing you need to do is to learn how to connect to reality. Now, my reality with this person I was in limerence with, as I said earlier, was that he lived on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, 15 hours flight away. He was secretive about me. I had no contact contact with any of his friends and family. He was uncertain about me moving over there. And I had evidence of cheating and lying. And you look at that on paper, that reality, and think, why on earth were you in that relationship? But as you know, I was in this mental state where I was getting off on my own internal fantasy. That was what was keeping me in there. So you need to sift out reality versus fantasy. And this can take a lot of time, because at this stage, you're probably struggling with self-trust. You're probably struggling with knowing what's what in your life. And a part of this is learning how to get safe in the body. I talk about this a lot here, but because part of the reason why we learn these maladaptive behaviors is because we just don't know how to feel safe in the body. We haven't learned those practices. We didn't learn those skills when we were young with our caregivers, but we can learn them now as adults. So make sure you practice your embodiment, tools like yoga, breath work, any kind of meditation that allows you to feel and sense the body. Dan Siegel's work is fantastic for that. And make sure you're reconnecting to your body. Don't just live from the neck up. Don't just stay ruminating in your head. Another thing that is incredibly powerful when you're coming out of love addiction is to re-engage or engage and deepen your other relationships, particularly your friendships. So I've seen clients of mine in Heal Your Heart School come out of love addiction, and a part of their process is to deepen their friendships with other women. And this is such an essential part, because learning how to relate intimately in a friendship sense is a really great learning ground to then go into a relationship where there's, a chance that you may have some triggers around love addiction. It's a safer way to kind of get used to being vulnerable, to get used to allowing yourself to be seen and heard, and to kind of contribute to that friendship in an open, transparent, and vulnerable way. Leaning into vulnerability is so important. I love Brené Brown's work for that. This is a real antidote to limerent behavior, to love addiction. And a great way to do this is to just expand your friendship circle as well. You never know where you're going to meet as a person who's going to end up as a great friend, hobby groups, community, all those kinds of things. So with regards to vulnerability, it's not only being vulnerable to others, like learning how to open up and just be yourself and make fun of yourself and just let others into your deeper fears, your darker fears. You don't need to go all in at once, like just stay safe in what you choose to do. But it's also about being vulnerable with yourself. And this is going to take time, and it often does happen through the mirror of friendship. So accepting the reality, accepting that you have this very large internal part of you that is really wired to seek addictive behavior in the form of creating a fantasy in order to cope and ignore a reality that's really uncomfortable. Knowing what is real, what do I see, what's happening right now, like staying in reality will start to rewire you out of the tendency for fantasy. So any mindfulness practices that bring you to the present moment is going to be fantastic. So the more you can keep your mind in the present moment, in reality, better the skill will be. Take me, for example. I used to just struggle with reading. I used to struggle with concentration because my brain had been wired to seek externally and to be always thinking about my limerent object. I started the early kind of parts of that pattern of mine in like high school, right? My brain was wired in this way, and it took time to redirect my brain to just get back to reality, to get back to focus, and concentration is all it is about really at the start, and meditation is really fantastic for that. At the same time, you're going to be detoxing from reality, okay? So the process of fantasy bonding was you giving yourself dopamine, right? When we talk about that emotional masturbation, what's actually going on is you're getting hits of dopamine from you doing that. Now, you might have other ways you get dopamine as well. It might be, eating chocolate's one for me and I'll never ever give it up, or, watching TV or whatever it is. Because you're going to be detoxing from this one particular way you give yourself dopamine, be kind on yourself if you need to lean on other ways. It's very important that you stop doing that and lean on those other things. You might need to eat more chocolate. It's absolutely so much better than wasting years of your life focused on someone that doesn't exist. But aware that you're going to be going through a detox process and that you have a tendency to be addicted to the fantasy. Before I give you the tool, I just want you to be aware, if you have a tendency for love addiction and you are dating at the moment, this is an area that please proceed with extreme caution, because dating by nature allows us to experience this kind of myriad rainbow kaleidoscope of emotions. And just like that addict who might have been sober for 20 years, it's just you get that whiff of alcohol again. It's that whiff of chemicals from dating again. So you need to make sure you have a support network around you, have a coach, have a therapist, have whoever you need in order to allow yourself to effectively stay sober, or at least to track the level of those emotions and track your internal experience to make sure you're not going to go down the slippery slope of limerence or love addiction. All right, so let's focus on this tool now. This is a tool that's going to allow you to check in with your body to see if it is love addiction or if it's just kind of you're in a bit of an obsessive state. So this is where you need to come into body awareness. So if you've been living from the neck up, this might be a little bit challenging for you, but allowing yourself to focus on the body and to know whether you're feeling expanded in the body, which is feeling light and at ease, or feeling contracted in the body, which is heavy and uncertain and in fear. So you might have a bit of a chronic state of contraction. You might be dysregulated or in this kind of contracted state a lot of the time. So you might need to start with finding moments in your life, in your day-to-day life, like with, somatic practices where you can expand and you can have those little glimmers and experiences of your body being expanded, so that you then notice when you go into contraction. It gives you better self-awareness around that. Practice doing things that expand you, and this is going to also help with the mental game of getting out of love addiction. So spend time walking on the beach, cuddling a pet, doing whatever, having tea with a friend, doing whatever it is that just opens you up a bit, where you just feel it in the body, this feeling of just getting a little bit closer to a regulated, safe state. And what you're doing is creating a soma or body experience and an imprint in your nervous system of what it feels like to feel safe. And this is going to rewire you eventually to seek addiction less and seek reality more. Reality is going to seem less scary, and you're going to have that pathway to addiction eventually sort of grown over, and you just won't be used to going down to that anymore. Like, you just know you won't do that. Building up self-trust is part of that. The tool is to just really check in with your body, notice if you're in contraction or expansion, and to really lean into moments of expansion, whatever experience that is that works for you. So when you're obsessing about someone and wondering, am I love addicted or am I not? Just notice, how long does that state of contraction last for? Can you spend most of your day in a pretty expanded state? Maybe work sucks and you might be contracted a bit, but you're not in a dysregulated, contracted state when you're thinking about him all the time, that constant fantasy, that rumination. That is the difference between just a simple obsession or obsessive state and actual love addiction and limerence. So if you want to know more specifically about the abandonment wound piece, which is actually at the core of love addiction and limerence, I urge you to watch my webinar, 3 Steps to Self-Love After a Toxic Relationship Ends, because I go through in detail how to actually heal the core wound that creates this for you. So you can sign up for that in the link below. I also have a Facebook group. If you'd like to meet me in person, just join at the link below. And if you want to know how to work with me to submit your application for Heal Your Heart School, there is a link in the calendar below. Just click it, book a time with me and my team, and we will speak and see if you're a fit to work with me. Please comment below if you have any questions or comments about this video. I always love to see your comments. They're very helpful for me, and I love to engage with you. And if you did find this video helpful, you will help me out a lot by just clicking the like button, because I really want to get out there in the algorithm, get more people watching these videos. That would be very helpful. And for now, here are some next step videos for you to watch so you can move one step closer to having a healed, secure, incredible relationship with yourself and being your true authentic self in love. And for now, I'll see you in the next video.